Chapter 841. His voice was bitter. I won't let you get pregnant again. Chichi, you won't have any more children. We won't have any more children. I won't put you in danger again. Never again. Tang Yu, this person and this heart will always be yours. No matter how hard it is, I will let you live well and live happily. However, I will never be able to see you in someone else's arms. Perhaps I'm stingy because I've said that Tang Yu belongs to Pei Chichi, and Pei Chichi must also belong to Tang Yu. His heart was as cold as water, but he still picked up her clothes and held her hand. Put on your clothes. I'll put them on myself. Her voice was still cold. Tang Yu paused for a moment and let go of her. He looked at her deeply and walked out of the room. She walked out after getting dressed. Tang Yu was sitting by the bed, guarding Xiaoshan. He looked at her indifferently. If you want to go back, I'll ask old Zhao to send you. Pei Chichi found a single-seater sofa and sat down. I'll wait for dawn before leaving. Although she did not explain, Tang Yu knew that she was worried about Xiaoshan. He did not say anything more and reached out to cover Xiaoshan with the quilt. The lights were dimmed. It was late at night, and it was quiet. Pei Chichi was very awake at first, but she slowly relaxed and felt sleepy. Her eyelids closed gently. The sofa was not a bed, so she could not sleep well and kept moving around. The night was getting darker and darker. A pair of big hands carried her and gently placed her on the soft bed. Then, a chubby little thing nestled in her arms. Its little mouth habitually searched for a place and its little paw rested on her shoulder. That feeling was very warm. Pei Chichi did not wake up. She did not want to wake up. In her dream, a pair of black eyes kept looking at her. It was very, very gentle. The first ray of sunlight shone into the pink ward. Pei Chichi felt that it was a little dazzling. She shivered uncomfortably and opened her eyes. There was no one around her. She lay quietly for a while and sat up. She looked down at her clothes. Wear it properly. She thought that Tang Yu and Xiaoshan had left and was about to get off the bed when she heard Xiaoxin's soft voice. Brother, have you found them? Pei Chichi's heart skipped a beat. She put on her shoes and went to open the bathroom door. Tang Yu was wearing a mask, and so was Xiaoshan. The two of them were squatting in front of a small basin, which contained the steak and cake that Xiaoshan had eaten last night. It was just that it didn't smell as good as before. Laughs immorally, Tang Yu was wearing gloves and holding a small stick in his hand. He was trying hard to find something. Little Shin squatted at the side and watched. Pei Chichi coughed. Take your time. Wait. Tang Yu's voice was soft as he picked up a diamond ring. He picked it up and looked at the indescribable small object. His voice was calm as he said, 30-carat American pink diamond, worth about 300 million. He tilted his head to look at her. Are you tempted? Pei Chichi did not know what to say. She pursed her lips. Give it back to Jinrong. Since Xiaoshan was fine, it was time for her to leave. At this moment, Xiaoshan looked at Tang Yu. Haha, this is Xiaoxin's poop. It's Xiaoxin's. Haha, I'll buy it for you next time. Tang Yu wanted to rub her hair but stopped himself when he thought of his clothes. Chapter 842. Tang Yu really couldn't bear to see her dressed like this, especially in the same car. He couldn't wait to take a bath with Xiaoshan and wash herself clean. Pei Chichi stood at the door for a while and guessed what he was thinking. She didn't bring her bag, so she could only take out 200 yuan notes to hail a taxi. Tang Yu didn't stop her. After she left, he immediately asked the nurse to clean the toilet bowl, and then he took Xiaoshan to take a bath. There was a big bathtub with a small bed inside. The plump little fellow was lying on the small bed, happily swaying back and forth, covered in foam. Tang Yu rinsed the ring and looked at it for a long time before putting it away. He stepped into the bathtub, stretched his body, and let out a long sigh of relief when he thought of Pei Chichi. Hey. The little fellow crawled over and climbed on his shoulder. Her little hands grabbed his short black hair, and she was playing very happily. Tang Yu smiled, pulled the little fellow down, and placed her on his chest, letting her sit and play. He looked at Xiaoxin's delicate little face, and pondered. Xiaoshan looked more like him, so Chichi didn't suspect anything. However, if Shen Zhongshan started to take action, how long could Xiaoxin's identity be hidden from her? Hee hee. Xiaoshan giggled. and her little white teeth were especially cute. She was raised very well and chubby, but no one knew that she was born prematurely. In the beginning, she was as fragile as a kitten, and he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to raise her, and he was afraid that she would inherit that disease. Fortunately, Xiaoxin was getting healthier day by day. Tang Yu reached out to pinch Xiaoxin's little face, and his heart skipped a beat. Xin, call daddy. Hee hee. Call daddy. Hee hee. Xiaoxin was very determined. Tang Yu smiled, and didn't insist anymore. After bathing together, he wrapped the little fellow in a small bath towel and carried her to the room. Someone had already prepared the little princess's dress and pretty little leather shoes. Tang Yu only had a bath towel around his waist, and he helped Xiaoxin put on her clothes before cleaning himself up. Then, he drove Xiaoxin to Lin Yun's place for breakfast. Xiaoxin ate on her brother's lap, which made Zhao Yang very eager. You're a boy. Lin Yun blushed and sighed in her heart. Tang Yu also felt bitter in his heart. She was clearly his daughter, but he couldn't acknowledge her and could only care for her like this. When he was about to leave for the company, Lin Yun followed him. Tang Yu, how is Chichi? Tang Yu placed his finger on the car door, lowered his eyes and smiled. She's going back first. Lin Yun nodded and didn't say anything else. Tang Yu got in the car and the black limousine quickly left the villa. Before going to Shengyuan, he went to the Lin Corporation's headquarters. As Tang Yu walked, Lin Jinrong's secretary followed him. Mr. Tang, the CEO is in a conference. Tang Yu stopped in his tracks, his expression indifferent. Then you'd better call him now to stop. The secretary was stunned. Tang Yu had already opened the door to the CEO's office. Lin Jinrong was indeed in a conference, and his secretary wanted to say something, but stopped because he couldn't afford to offend any of them. Lin Jinrong quickly said a few words in French to end the conference, and then ordered indifferently, make 2 cups of coffee. Chapter 843. Lin Jinrong looked at Tang Yu and gestured for him to sit down. He then smiled. I heard from my aunt that Xiaoxin is fine. Yes. Tang Yu walked over and threw something in front of Lin Jinrong. This is for you. I found it in Xiaoxin. I thought you might need it. Lin Jinrong stared at the pink diamond. It should be filled with the smell of Xiaoxin. After a long time, he smiled softly. I can still afford a ring. The corner of Tang Yu's mouth twitched. He sat down on the sofa and held his forehead with his slender fingers. His voice was a little tired. Jinrong, you and her won't end well. Give up. What about you? Lin Jinrong sat with his fingers folded into the shape of a pyramid. Brother Tang Yu, what's the result between you and her? Or, what plans do you have for her? Can you tell me? Tang Yu hooked his lips and said lightly, we got together last night. Lin Jinrong's expression changed. He looked straight at Tang Yu and then said word by word, I heard that Chichi is Tang Jiyuan's child. Jinrong, I believe that with your intelligence, you can already guess whose child Xiaoxin is. Why are you constrained by Pei Chichi's background? Tang Yu lowered his eyes. Even if she is my sister, I will not give up. If it wasn't an accident, even if she was his sister, he would still want their child. Jinrong, Chichi is very important to me, but you are also very important to me, Tang Yu said lightly and then got up to leave. Lin Jinrong sat there. From his fingertips to the soles of his feet, he felt cold. He sat there in a daze and closed his eyes. Sure enough, it was just as he thought. However, he was the fool, and the fool was Chichi. He thought he had another chance, while Chichi thought that Tang Yu didn't love her that much. His secretary came in with coffee and was surprised to find that Tang Yu had left. Lin Jinrong's voice was very calm. Linda, cancel all the itineraries for today. How ridiculous. Yesterday, he had proposed to her in high spirits, but today, he had already guessed what he was thinking. Originally, he had a lot of achievements in his heart, and he felt that he didn't care. He even thought that he could compete with Tang Yu. But now, he still hesitated. Tang Yu went downstairs and sat in the car. After pondering for a while, he picked up his phone and opened QQ. He logged into Chu Shibei's alternate account and sent a message to Pei Xiaohua. Did you have a good night? It took 5 minutes for the other side to reply. First, he sent an emoji wiping sweat, followed by a string of words, you will never imagine what I went through last night. Tell me about it. I was almost proposed to by the boy I used to like. There was a picture of a girl's heart at the end. Tang Yu frowned and quickly replied, Are you going to agree? No. Pei Xiaohua replied quickly. Of course not. Then, are you moved? It took 5 minutes for the other side to reply. The content of the reply made Tang Yu's heart jump. If I hadn't been married, I would have said yes. Tang Yu frowned and threw the phone aside. But after a while, he picked it up again. He frowned and thought for a long time before sending it over again. You were married? Yes. Pei Xiaohua sent an emoji. My ex-husband was very handsome, but also a jerk. He ran away with another woman. Handsome, but also a jerk. Tang Yu was speechless. Chapter 844. Pei Xiaohua replied quickly, His body is actually quite good. His technique is also good. Tang Yu's face darkened. How could she chat so openly with a man who was almost a stranger? He thought of her shy body last night. How could she be so open with her mouth? She must have been influenced by old Khan. He thought for a while and sent another message. How good was it? Do you still miss it occasionally? Only 3 words came from the other side. Stupid child. Tang Yu chuckled. His chuckle had a profound meaning to it. Xiao Ran knocked on the door and motioned for her to come in. When Xiao Ran came in, she noticed that the corners of Tang Yu's mouth were slightly raised. He seemed to be in a good mood. How's the preparation for Marvel's press conference going? Tang Yu's tone was indifferent as he buried himself in the documents. Xiao Ran nodded. It's almost ready. But which media does the CEO want to give the exclusive headline to? Tang Yu pondered for a while. Just do what you did in the past. Xiao Ran didn't say anything else. He thought to himself that it was mainly because Pei Chichi was working as a magazine photographer. The CEO couldn't be too obvious if he wanted to give it to her. She reported a few more things before leaving. Tang Yu stared at her back and was in a daze for a while. On the other hand, Pei Chichi hated the chief editor's request. Chief editor, our magazine focuses on the needs of women. It's not appropriate to follow a man all the time, right? Pei Chichi was screaming in her heart. She was a photographer, not a paparazzi. This time, the editor-in-chief was not joking with her. He held a cigarette in one hand. The editor-in-chief usually smoked when he was talking about serious matters, and threw a few pieces of paper on the table. He took a deep puff and said, Don't women need men? Look at this data. Pei Chichi took it and looked at the data on it. She couldn't help but be stunned. The Weibo account opened under the name of Tang Yu's fan club has more than 30 million views, and the number of fans has reached more than 7 million. The chief editor narrowed his eyes and said, Do you know how many fans the A-list celebrities have? Some of those tens of millions of fans are bullshit, bought with money. Pei Chichi's body was a little stiff. But these successful people are different from the popular newbies. Editor-in-chief, if you make a big fuss or aim to make a profit, you will be sued at any time. The chief editor calmed himself down and waved his hand. The higher-ups are interested in doing a new magazine. It will be a sister to Jiaren's original magazine. It's mainly targeted at successful men. More importantly, rich and handsome men. Forget about those balding men in their 40s. No woman would spend money on them. Pei Chichi looked at the bald chief editor and pursed her lips. The previous cover of Shengyuan Corporation's CEO was very successful. Look, the enthusiasm of the female fans is very high. So, the new magazine will use the previous issue's character. I heard that Marvel's new product launch is going to be held soon. Little Pei, you can't be disappointed. You have to get this exclusive. The chief editor was astute. It's okay to take a few photos. The main thing is the interview. Now, the readers have a big appetite. If we can give them a copy of the special VCD recording, it will definitely sell out. Pei Chichi couldn't help but say, Chief editor, what's the difference between this and consuming men? The chief editor's eyes widened. We don't need you to sell it, nor do we need me to sell it. Fine. Chapter 845. The managing editor immediately changed his expression and smiled. Xiao Pei, I can see that you're an all-rounder. How about this? I'll assign 3 or 4 people to you. You're familiar with Amy and the rest. Don't feel pressured. We'll have a double issue with Jiao Ren. As he spoke, he stood up and walked to her side. He patted her on the shoulder and said earnestly, betting a new magazine on a newcomer. This shows that the higher-ups value you. Little Pei, work hard. Who knows, maybe this office will be yours when I return to H-City in the future. Pei Chichi was speechless and resisted weakly. Managing editor, I don't have any lofty ideals. I just want to eat and drink with my mentor. Silly girl, don't talk nonsense. The managing editor turned into a kind elder and patted her again. Work hard. I have high hopes for you. Pei Chichi looked at him with resentment in her eyes. She felt very uncomfortable when she came out of the office. Old Khan looked at her as if he was about to explode. What's wrong? Old Khan leaned against the wall and looked at his beloved little disciple. Pei Chichi leaned against the wall opposite him and imitated Old Khan by stretching her legs against the opposite wall. Old Khan could be tall, but her legs were only half the size of his, so naturally, she couldn't. She pursed her lips and said, the managing editor said that the higher-ups are going to start a new magazine, mainly aimed at female consumers, with elite men in various industries as models. Old Khan smiled, revealing his white teeth. That's pretty good. Actually, Jiao Ren has been going downhill all these years. If we don't reform it, it'll really have nothing to eat. In the past, the sponsors were all big names. Look at now, even Tom, Dick, and Harry can be on it. Pei Chichi looked up. Old Khan, I'm serious. I don't want to get it wrong. Are you afraid that your ability is limited? Old Khan smiled. No. Her voice was a little weak. It's not like that. Pei Chichi looked up at the small window above her and said softly, I just feel that life in City H is more suitable for me. Perhaps returning to City B was a mistake. She shouldn't have come back. Laro Khan stared at her for a long time and said in a hoarse voice, Are you backing down again? She pressed the cigarette butt. Isn't it just a matter of sleeping with a man or not? Sleep with him again. If you think that's it, then you should let him go. If you still want to sleep with him and don't want him to sleep with someone else, then you can't let him go. Pei Chichi glared at him. Old Tease said, his words are crude, but his logic is not. But what if he's a blood brother? Pei Chichi looked at Laro Khan and asked faintly. Old Khan was stumped by the question. When he came back to his senses, Pei Chichi was already far away. Pei Chichi returned to her desk and stared blankly at the pile of things. She simply wanted to pack them up and leave immediately, but she couldn't bear to part with Amy, Laro Khan, and even the cunning chief editor. Sighing, he accepted his fate. The little man on the computer popped up again. It was Chu Shibei. Why haven't you spoken for a long time? Pei Chichi typed a string of words slowly. Xiao Beibei, the chief editor wants me to sell myself to men. If I lose my job, can you take care of me? The other side replied with an emoticon and said, sure. Then, he added a few more words. I'll definitely take care of you until you're fair and fat. Chapter 846. Although she had only known Chu Shibei on the internet for a few days, she could feel that he was a sweet boy and she could bully him as much as she wanted. The screen went blank for a while before a line of words appeared. Yes. Why don't we inspect the goods first? Pei Chichi looked at it and laughed for a long time. Little brat. On the other side, Tang Yu smiled. His fingers gently stroked the screen, as if he was touching her little face. Chichi, if I can give you a little happiness, I'm willing to do everything I can. He pressed the intercom and called Xiao Ran. Arrange for the exclusive launch to be cancelled. Xiao Ran was surprised. If the exclusive launch was cancelled, then it must have been decided internally. But it was not convenient for him to ask, so he just wrote it down and left. The launch of the number 7 robot was unprecedentedly grand because there was a rumor from Marvel that there would be a mysterious guest that day. The reporters arrived at the venue early and occupied the best position to take the exterior shots. They could only enter the hotel lobby when the time was up. Pei Chichi and Laro Khan came together. The venue was at the hotel in the science park of B City. The autumn sun was a little hot, and Pei Chichi and Laro Khan's faces were covered in oil. Laro Khan looked down at Pei Chichi's little face. Why do you want to learn photography? It's so nice for a girl to enjoy the air conditioning in the office. Pei Chichi smiled and wiped her sweat with a tissue. I thought I only needed to go to a place with good scenery to take a few beautiful photos. I didn't expect to be a paparazzi. Laro Khan patted her comfortingly. After a while, I will apply to the chief editor to go back to H City. I will bring you along. His tone made Pei Chichi feel like she was his little luggage. Although it was plain, it was already very rare for Pei Chichi. Her eyes were a little hot, but she said nothing and continued to look at the entrance. At about 9:30, a few black limousines lined up in front of the hotel entrance. They were all Rolls-Royce Phantoms, and the Golden Goddess stood proudly in the sun. The driver got out of the car and walked to the door of the second car. The door opened and a noble figure got out. Tang Yu calmly buttoned up the first button on his suit. He was already used to being besieged by so many reporters, so he remained calm. Mr. Tang, the new product is so secretive. There's still half an hour before the press conference. Can you reveal it in advance? Mr. Tang, I heard that you personally participated in the creative design this time. Does it have a special meaning for you? Under the flashing lights, Tang Yu was escorted forward by the security guards. He did not answer any of the reporters' questions. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks. In front of them was Pei Chichi. She was holding a heavy camera up to him, wearing a black t-shirt. A t-shirt and jeans, really not too eye-catching. However, even if his Chichi was wearing a gunny sack, he would still recognize her and think that she looked good. Tang Yu did not move. Pei Chichi's hand that was holding the camera also froze. In the lens, he was looking straight at her. She put down the camera and stood there, looking at him in a daze. Tang Yu walked straight to her and stood in front of her. She only took a step back. He stood in front of her and said in a low voice, "Are you Miss Pei from Beauty Magazine?" What did he mean? Chapter 847. Just now, my secretary has confirmed with your magazine that the exclusive interview for the new product will be held in your new issue. His voice was elegant and charming, and he was talking to an unknown reporter like this, so it was naturally attention-grabbing. Pei Chichi's lips suddenly felt a little dry. Exclusive interview rights, shouldn't she have begged him many times? Why did he give it to her so readily this time? Pei Chichi, because I miss you. Tang Yu's gaze was deep, and he quickly straightened his body. At this moment, Pei Chichi realized how close he had been to her just now, almost whispering into her ear. Something was breaking out of her cocoon, but she couldn't grasp it. He was too strong and calm, while she was just like a lab rat under his claws. He watched her struggle hopelessly, coldly watching her coldly. Old Khan patted her and grinned. What's wrong? Pei Chichi lowered her eyes. Nothing. Let's get ready to go in. Just as they were about to go in, Old Khan's eyes widened, not for anything else, but because he saw Pei Huan. Pei Huan had actually come. She was wearing a white palace ring dress, and her long hair was curled up to her waist. She looked rather pure and innocent. Old Khan's eyebrows twitched. After all, he had slept with someone before, so he didn't feel confident. Pei Huan walked over and glanced at Old Khan, as though she had forgotten what had happened that night, and said to Pei Chichi, "I'll wait for you in the car later." Pei Chichi guessed what she was talking about. She lowered her head and fiddled with the camera, nodding. Pei Huan looked at her ambiguous expression and was a little angry. She felt that she was always sticking her warm face to her cold butt, but it also felt uncomfortable if she didn't stick close to her. Pei Huan and her manager, Xiao Mai, went in first. From the looks of it, it was very likely that Pei Huan would be the spokesperson for Marvel this time. Pei Chichi was a little surprised. Because Pei Huan had been involved in a scandal during the previous endorsement, Tang Yu didn't seem like a decision-maker who would use a tainted celebrity. She and Laro Khan walked in, and the staff quickly arranged them in an orderly manner. Their seats were near the front, right in the middle of the second row. After Old Khan sat down, he whispered, "Pei Chichi, do you think we're taking advantage of you?" Pei Chichi glanced at him and smiled. I think you're taking advantage of Pei Huan. Old Khan touched his nose and said nothing. The staff on the stage were busy, and after 10 minutes, the scene calmed down. Marvel's public relations staff presided over the press conference. After a brief speech, they stepped back and said, "We welcome Mr. Tang Yu, the CEO of Marvel, to open this press conference for us." Tang Yu ascended the stage from the side. He was still calm and elegant. He took the microphone and smiled. Everyone knows that the last time Marvel made a big move was almost 2 years ago. Originally, this press conference was supposed to be held a week ago, but something important happened that day. As Tang Yu said this, there was a commotion from the audience. They must know what the important thing was. There was a little more gentleness in his eyes. It's the birthday of a very important person. The audience fell silent. Mr. Shen's birthday wasn't this month. If Mr. Tang said this publicly, it would be very disrespectful to Mr. Shen. So the rumors about Mr. Shen forcing a marriage were true? Thinking about it, if a man loved you, he wouldn't wait until he was almost 30 to marry you. Chapter 848. Tang Yu smiled. The main product this time is actually a high-end chip. In terms of sales, it's not targeted at the general public. However, in order to highlight the power of this chip, Marvel custom-made the number 7 robot. Let me emphasize again, this is not the main product this time. The number 7 robot is a limited edition version. In total, there won't be more than 10,000 units. There was complete silence. The stage suddenly darkened. There was an uproar below. Following that, specks of starlight appeared above the stage, like little stars in the night sky. Cicadas and frogs chirped all around, as though they had walked into a midsummer night. Their hearts and minds calmed down in an instant. Pei Chichi was in the darkness. Listening to those sounds, she seemed to hear the sound of flowing water. The lights slowly lit up, giving off a warm yellow glow. Tang Yu sat on a beige sofa, flipping through a magazine. Beside him sat a small, ugly, and adorable thing. Was that the number 7 robot? That little thing was very realistic and soft, although it wasn't pretty. In particular, its expression was very vivid. At first, it sat obediently, but after a while, it seemed to be impatient. Then, it swept to Tang Yu's side, laying its face on his lap and looking up. Big brother. Tang Yu was still holding the magazine. A slender hand stroked the ugly but adorable thing. Little 7, don't mess around. Little 7. Pei Chichi's body trembled. The little thing on the stage pouted. Its eyes seemed to be brimming with tears, as though it had been wronged. Then, it actually ignored Tang Yu. It crawled to the side and lay down. Moreover, it was the kind where its butt was facing the sky. Tang Yu put down the magazine in his hand and glanced at her. He sat down and pressed the ugly but adorable thing on his lap. He patted it lightly. Are you angry? No. Little 7 lay down, its voice muffled. After that, no, there was no after. Tang Yu didn't plan on revealing too much of his private life to others. The light dimmed once more and 7 disappeared. Tang Yu held a small chip in his hand. His gaze swept around and finally landed on Pei Chichi's shocked face. He smiled slightly. This chip has a memory function. It's so powerful that you can't even imagine it. It can even copy the person you once loved. His black eyes were fixated on her little face, and Pei Chichi actually couldn't move an inch. Tang Yu's lips curled into a faint smile. As for robot number 7, it needs to be customized and undergo a strict background check. At this point, the reporters became excited. What they were most concerned about was, Mr. Tang, the price of robot number 7 must be too high, right? In my opinion, it is priceless. Tang Yu was ambiguous and did not want to reveal too much. As for the rest, I will accept an exclusive interview with Jiaren. Everyone will know then. There was another uproar at the scene. Pei Huan sat backstage and rolled her eyes. If the public knew that this press conference was just to let Pei Chichi see that little 7 and that there wouldn't be any robot for sale, how would they feel? Anyone who ordered robot number 7 would be rejected. What a good hand. Pei Huan bit her fingernails and thought lazily. Tang Yu, do you know that I can't afford your love, and I can't afford to play your games? Don't play this game of you guess and I hide with you. I will really disappear. She spoke sternly, not leaving any leeway for him. Tang Yu had to admit that the Pei Chichi in front of him was no longer the little girl from before. She was not just a stubborn little girl. She was even willing to deal with him for the sake of her livelihood and Laro Khan. She would also eat with Jinrong. The boundaries of her survival were no longer as clear as before, but had become blurred. It was not time, but the harm that was slowly wearing her down. It was because he did not protect her well that she became so detached from society and lived so cautiously as if she was treading on thin ice. Tang Yu's voice was a little hoarse. Chichi, you guessed it. Chapter 850. She looked at him coldly. Mr. Tang, why are you admitting this now? Is it because the robot named Little Seven can't satisfy you, so you're telling me that we're not siblings, so we can have sex, right? His eyes narrowed. Pei Chichi, is that what you think? Yes. She stood up. I don't care what deal you have with Shen Lian. Tang Yu, since you've chosen her, you'll choose her till the end. She then got up and walked to the door, forgetting the purpose of her visit. However, before the door could open, her arms were caught. Then, her two slender arms were raised high and held in place. She was pinned down by him, unable to move. Once she moved, she would be held even tighter. Pei Chichi looked up and said coldly, Mr. Tang, are you excited again? I'm not interested in you at all. Let go of me. He narrowed his eyes and leaned forward. His handsome face revealed a touch of desolation. Pei Chichi, do you hate me? Yes. She answered resolutely. His pupils were darker and his body was stiff, but he didn't let go of her. Pei Chichi looked at him, her eyes as calm as a pool of stagnant water. Tang Yu, is this interesting? She smiled and looked into his eyes. Can you break off the engagement with Shen Lian now? He couldn't do it. Their bodies were still touching, and the desire that he had just raised his head was suppressed. His body loosened. Pei Chichi thought that he had let her go. She was about to stand up, but her lips were kissed by him the next second. He kissed her mouth passionately, inside and out, wrapping himself around her body with his hot tongue. She moved a little, and in exchange, he took her even more violently. One of his long legs was stuck between her, and he only needed to lift it slightly to make her feel awkward. He called her name, called her baby, and said that he missed her very much. That kiss went from her lips to her eyebrows, then to the back of her ears and her neck. She was forced to tilt her head back and accept his slightly rough kisses. At this moment, Tang Yu seemed to have lost his mind. He pressed against her and coaxed, Chichi, wait for me, okay? She tried her best to widen her eyes to look at the ceiling. When she heard his words, Pei Chichi chuckled lightly. She lowered her face and looked at his slightly intoxicated face. What about our child? Tang Yu, why did you tell us that you are brother and sister? If it wasn't for that, the child wouldn't have, no. She closed her eyes and a stream of tears flowed from the corner of her eyes. She opened her slightly reddened eyes. Can you return the child to me? There was a hint of accusation in her eyes. Just as he thought, she hated him even more. Tang Yu closed his eyes. He couldn't, at least not now. Pei Chichi's body leaned back, and she looked at him helplessly. After looking at him, she chuckled. Tang Yu, if you can't, then don't pester me anymore. He didn't let go of her, nor did he take another step forward. He only looked at her. That day, just like now. She cried. When I opened my eyes, I saw a bright light. She looked up, and her voice was very soft and calm. But I knew that the child was gone. I didn't even get to see him. She was very calm, as though she was talking about someone else's matter. But with every sentence she said, the wound in her heart would tear open. Chapter 851. Tang Yu looked at her, seeing that she was willing to talk to him for the first time. At this moment, he wished he could make it clear to her and tell her that Xiaoshan was his child. But it was not the time yet. The fate of Sheng Yuan and Madame Lin, as well as her illness, were not 100% certain. He did not dare to take the risk. Another concern was Xin Xin's safety. It would be safer for Lin Yun and Zhao Yi's child to be by her side. This was a father's concern. Because of Chichi, he allowed Xiaoshen to come into this world earlier. Looking at the lively and adorable Xiaoshen now, no one would know how much she had suffered when she was born. At that time, Xiaoshen's mother had undergone a bone marrow operation and he did not accompany her. He owed Pei Chichi and Xiaoshen a lot. No amount of love could make up for the child's innate lack of love. Tang Yu hugged her gently. He did not do anything else to her. He just hugged her. It was a very warm hug. It was a comforting and apologetic hug, and he kept saying sorry in her ear. Her tears fell like rain. She could not control herself. She cried miserably in the arms of the man she loved and hated. Her little hands pounded on his back, unable to utter a single word. She cried and fell into his arms, calling his name and saying that she hated him. The sunlight shone in from the window and enveloped them, giving them a trace of warmth. Tang Yu kept patting her, letting her beat and bite him, letting her vent. He said sorry and that he could not let go. He told her, "Chichi, wait for me." In a blur, she seemed to have fallen asleep, lying in the crook of his arm, exhausted. It was as if she had just found out that she did not have a child that day. She did not know how long it had been before she woke up. She was lying on his lap. A big palm was placed on her back, patting her gently. She got up and knelt beside him, tears still hanging on her eyelashes. Her expression at this moment was very much like Xiao Qi, asking for a hug. In fact, wasn't Xiao Qi also a substitute for Chichi? And he exposed Xiao Qi in front of the outside world just to express his feelings to her. "I ask you again, why did you tell such a lie?" she asked him quietly. Tang Yu's gaze quietly fell on her little face. He faintly smiled and reached out to stroke her black hair. There was a huge difference between touching little Seven and touching Pei Chichi. Pei Chichi pursed her lips and looked at him with trembling eyes. His voice was low and hoarse. "Is this answer very important to you?" "Yes." Her voice trembled slightly. Tang Yu's fingers were still gently stroking her long hair, but she didn't push his hand away. Finally, he said, "Chichi, you care about this answer because you haven't given up on me." She wanted to say no, but just as her lips moved, his finger pressed against her lips, stopping her. "You need to find the truth yourself." He smiled, and the pain seemed to be far away from them. "Chichi, I'm here," he said in the end. Pei Chichi's lips were still trembling. In the end, she ran away. She was afraid, very afraid. There seemed to be countless secrets hidden in Tang Yu's eyes. He said, "Chichi, I'm here. You need to find the truth yourself." Chapter 852. While Pei Chichi was in a daze, Pei Huan's voice rang in her ears. "Pei Chichi, how can you walk? There are stairs in front of you. Do you want to fall to your death?" She was grabbed by her arm. Pei Chichi turned around and saw Pei Huan's twisted face, as if she hadn't made a sound for 3 days. Pei Huan let go of her and continued, "Look at you. You look like you were raped by a man." She stared at Pei Chichi's slightly swollen lips and her dazed gaze, especially the hickey on her neck. The more she looked, the more it looked like it. "Did you get raped by Tang Yu?" Pei Huan asked suspiciously. Pei Chichi came back to her senses and touched her neck. She said calmly, "I was bitten by a dog." Tang Yu was standing behind them for some reason. When he heard that, his face darkened. Behind him was Xiao Ran, who lowered his head and tried to hold back his laughter. The CEO was probably very angry. Pei Huan was especially happy. She watched as Tang Yu left with a dark expression. After they left, she looked at Pei Chichi again and coughed softly. "This Saturday, I've arranged for a religious ceremony at the house in Qingshui Road. You should come as well. Consider it a show of filial piety." Pei Chichi's feelings were complicated. She wasn't Tang Jiyuan's child, but her intuition told her that she wasn't Pei Ming's child either. Tang Yu definitely knew, but he told her to find the truth herself, so he wouldn't say it. She pursed her lips and looked at Pei Huan. "If I tell you that I'm my father's child, will you hate me again? Will you be irreconcilable with me? Pei Huan was stunned and her face stiffened. After a while, she said, Pei Chichi, I don't have the strength to hate anymore, just like how I don't have the strength to love anymore. She looked up with a heart-wrenching look in her eyes. Look at me. I have everything. I get hundreds of millions in dividends every year. I didn't become a celebrity for the money, but for the fun. I don't have to sleep with anyone, but I always feel a little cold when I sleep at night. As she spoke, she started to laugh. As she laughed, tears welled up in her eyes. Pei Chichi, am I a slut in your eyes? How could I bother you? You used to be the person I hated the most. Without waiting for Pei Chichi to speak, she continued, I know Lin Jinrong wants to be with you. That day in the restaurant, you and him were photographed. Later, it was President Qin who suppressed the news. Do you know why? Because President Qin likes you too. Pei Chichi, I used to hate you. I hated that you were liked by so many people. But now, it doesn't matter. Being liked by others is also a burden. Look at you, how much happier are you than me? Pei Chichi did not move. Pei Huan looked up and stopped her tears. Let's not talk about it anymore. You won't understand even if I talk about it. She stomped her feet. Pei Chichi, I take back what I said earlier. You're still as annoying as before. She flung her head and left. Pei Chichi's faint voice sounded from behind. Pei Huan. Pei Huan paused and turned around. Pei Chichi was still looking at her calmly without any expression on her face. After a long time, she said softly, but I think you've gotten a lot cuter. Pei Huan's lips trembled as her facial muscles twitched unnaturally. She nearly shook off the hyaluronic acid she had injected last month. Really annoying. Pei Huan turned around and left. However, she felt a sweet feeling in her heart as she tossed her hair. She arrived at the lobby on the first floor and saw Laro Khan waiting for Pei Chichi. Chapter 853. Old Khan didn't fight back. He looked at that little waist twisting and turning. He remembered how soft her waist was that night. That night, she was actually quite young. Pei Huan had had many men, but the night Old Khan wanted her, she couldn't use those skills at all. Old Khan was a rough man, a straightforward one. He was strong enough to make her tremble, and he didn't need any skills to break her down. That night was the only time Pei Huan felt pain and happiness in the past 2 years, and the last time was given to her by Lin Jinrong. The difference was that she liked Lin Jinrong, while Old Khan was a complete wild man. Especially a wild man who had just pulled up his pants from another woman. She didn't want him at all. Old Khan watched Pei Huan leave, a little envious, but he didn't stop her. Pei Huan walked to the door, and her manager, Xiao Mai, immediately opened an umbrella for her. There were also 2 men in black who looked like bodyguards following her. Old Khan looked at them and quietly took out a cigarette from his pocket. He had only taken 2 puffs when a small hand snatched it away, put it out, and threw it into the trash can. You're smoking again. Haven't you been traumatized by the shadow in your lungs the last time? He turned around and saw that it was Pei Chichi. Old Khan smiled. Isn't it because I'm bored? I thought you wouldn't be bored when you saw Pei Huan. Pei Chichi was a little sarcastic. She really had a problem with Old Khan on that matter. Even if Pei Huan didn't care, she still cared a little. Old Khan listened and hugged his little disciple affectionately. Chichi, I know you're jealous, right? I'm not. Pei Chichi struggled, but couldn't break free from Old Khan's big fan-like hands. Old Khan smiled as he carried her away. This way, she would behave herself and would not cause him any trouble. And this intimate scene was seen by Tang Yu, who was sitting in the limousine. He narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "Drive." Xiao Ran saw it too and sighed in his heart. I wonder how traumatized the president is. When he arrived at Sheng Yuan building, Tang Yu took the elevator alone. He stood there indifferently and looked at himself in the mirror. His face was still the same, handsome and cold. Only when he saw Pei Chichi would the fire in his heart ignite, and because of Little Seven's appearance at Marvel's press conference, the outside world had a better understanding of Tang Yu. What a mysterious pervert. Tang Yu raised Little Seven. Wasn't this a hobby that only Otakus would have? Moreover, the way they interacted with each other was like a couple, which was a direct slap to Shen Lian's face. The newspapers reported about Little Seven and Tang Yu, but they were just speculations. After all, that was all they saw. However, Shen Lian could not hold it in any longer. The call came the next day. Tang Yu was in a meeting. When he saw that it was Shen Lian, he turned off his phone and said to his subordinates, "Continue the meeting." Xiao Ran saw Shen Lian's name and did not say anything. He thought that the arrogant President Shun would come looking for him later. Sure enough, before the meeting was over, the second secretary came over quietly and said to Xiao Ran in a low voice, "Sister Xiao, President Shun is here. He looks angry." "Got it. Go and tell President Shun that he still has half an hour," Xiao Ran said calmly at the door. Chapter 854. Naturally, Xiao Ran did not care about Shen Lian. He just had to put up a front. Firstly, she felt that if Shen Lian could not wait for half an hour, she would not be able to achieve anything. Secondly, the CEO's attitude was there, so she did not need to bother to wait on him. The second secretary understood and nodded her head before leaving. In fact, everyone could see clearly that Shen Lian was only a nominal fiancé in the past year. Xiao Ran returned to his seat and whispered a few words to Tang Yu. Looking at Tang Yu's calm expression, he must have already guessed it. The meeting ended half an hour later. Xiao Ran followed behind Tang Yu with the documents in his hands. When they arrived at Tang Yu's office, Shen Lian had already come out from the guest room to wait. She was obviously very anxious. Tang Yu paused at the door. "Secretary Xiao, make a cup of coffee for CEO Shen." Xiao Ran nodded. Shen Lian's voice was a little sharp. "Tang Yu, I've stopped drinking coffee a long time ago." She lifted her leg and said coldly, "I'm not allowed to drink here." After saying that, she smiled strangely. Her smile made Xiao Ran's hair stand on end. However, Tang Yu still looked calm. Shen Lian hated his expression, but there was nothing she could do. After Xiao Ran left, she said coldly, "Aren't you going to invite me in?" Tang Yu smiled impeccably. Shen Lian felt extremely sad. This was the man she loved deeply, but he no longer had any feelings for her. Or perhaps, he did not even have feelings for her. After the door closed, Tang Yu walked to the back of the desk and sat down. He looked at her indifferently. "What's the matter?" He was as indifferent as before. He still did not care about how she was doing or whether her leg was hurting. That's right, he wouldn't care, because her legs were his masterpiece. Why would he care? Why did that kind of news appear? Shen Lian's voice was agitated. A newspaper appeared in her hand, and she threw it in front of Tang Yu. He only glanced at it briefly before picking it up with a frown. The headline was about the grand launch of Robot Number 7. Shen Lian's voice was stifled. "Tang Yu, the outside world speculation about you is that you are a man with a special interest in X, and this speculation has even surpassed the release of Marvel's new products. Is this what you want? Was he really a pervert? Or could it be that you couldn't forget her, so you made her into a robot so that she could accompany you every day?" This fact deeply impacted her. She, a living woman, was actually inferior to a robot. So what? How others think is their business. Tang Yu smiled faintly. Just because of this. He was calm and collected. He was not impatient, but he was not overly concerned either. This was his attitude towards her for the past year. If she was an ordinary woman, her heart would have died. However, Shen Lian was determined to do so. If she was not happy, Tang Yu and Pei Chichi could not be happy either. She could only hold on to her trump card and force him to submit. "Okay. Even so, how do you explain the exclusivity? Why did you give it to Pei Chichi?" Shen Lian's voice was a little agitated. "You clearly know that Jin Taiha's man and Jiao Ren are sworn enemies." Tang Yu looked at her quietly. "Shen Lian, I am not a person who can't distinguish between public and private interests. I just want to see the result. I am very optimistic about Jiao Ren's bi-monthly publication." He did not need to explain anything else to her. Chapter 855. Then what's your bottom line? Tang Yu was still unmoved. Shun Lian's voice suddenly became sharp. Tang Yu, you're stepping on my bottom line now. What do you want? You want to be with her again, right? Think about Sheng Yuan's future and her safety. As soon as she finished speaking, her eyes narrowed and she felt a little regretful. When he looked at Tang Yu, his gaze was filled with caution as he took a step back. Tang Yu slowly stood up and walked in front of Shun Lian in 2 steps. He stretched out his long arm and pinched her sharp chin with his fingers. He did not have any protective feelings for the fairer sex. Instead, he used all of his strength and almost crushed Shun Lian's bones. Shun Lian was in pain. She closed her eyes and said in a weak voice, "Let go of me." Tang Yu's face was as pale as snow. "Shun Lian, listen up. My bottom line is Pei Chichi," he said word by word. "If you dare to touch her, I'll make you suffer 100 times worse." She was in pain from his grip, but she could not say a word. She could only stare at him with her eyes wide open. There was fear, sadness, and disbelief in her eyes. At this moment, the door opened. Xiao Ran was holding a cup of coffee in his hand and looked at the 2 people inside in shock. Tang Yu suddenly let go of Shun Lian. She stumbled 2 steps back and covered her chin with her hand. She was still in shock. Just now, she really thought that Tang Yu was going to kill her. Xiao Ran put the coffee on the table professionally. "Mr. Shun, please have a drink." After that, he nodded and left, closing the door. "Tang Yu, did you see that? Because of your attitude, even your secretary looks down on me and brushes me off." Shun Lian sneered. In the hearts of everyone in Sheng Yuan, only Pei Chichi deserves to be the CEO's wife, right? She looked at him coldly. "As long as I, Shun Lian, am around, I want to see how she can come back. Tang Yu, even if she's with you, she won't be the wife of Sheng Yuan's CEO. I swear. Chichi won't care." Tang Yu's voice was indifferent. Shun Lian raised her head. "What about you? Don't you care? You're such a proud and arrogant man, how could you not be attached to power? Think about the Tang and Lin families behind you. Will they allow you to be so willful?" Shun Lian smiled pitifully. She could only threaten him with this. However, a woman could only use this to threaten a man. It was very sad. She felt sorry for herself, but she did not want to admit defeat. Tang Yu took a step back. He looked at her strange smile and felt his heart ache. In the past, Shun Lian was also a girl as beautiful as a lotus. "Shun Lian, let go now. Letting go of me and her is letting go of yourself. Isn't that good?" he said quietly. "She's your sister. I don't have a sister like that." Shun Lian's voice was agitated. "I only know that I'm the only daughter of the Shun family. Jin Tai has only heir." She looked at Tang Yu. "You must think that I'm crazy, right?" There was a hint of madness on her face. "Do you think that I don't know what you're thinking? You'll drive me crazy and send me to the mental asylum, then take back the shares in my hand. Dream on, Tang Yu. I've already asked my lawyer to sign a document. If anything happens to me, the things in my hands will take revenge on you in ways that you can't imagine." Shun Lian smiled as she stepped back. "Tang Yu, you can't do anything to me. Even if I die, I'll still be your fiancé." Chapter 856. Shun Lian went downstairs and got into the car. Actually, she could not drive with her legs. Dr. Zhong had warned her many times, but she did not care. She had already died once, so she was not afraid of dying again. The car drove very fast, and the wind hit her face. It was painful, just like how Tang Yu's cold words hit her face. Shun Lian chuckled softly. Her chuckle gave her goosebumps. The red sports car drove to Shengyuan Hospital. Shun Zhongshan's condition had worsened recently, so he was admitted to the hospital again. Shun Lian got out of the car. When she stepped on the ground, she felt a little pain. She tried her best to walk steadily so that others would not notice the problem with her legs. She did not want others to know that she was a cripple. And this was given to her by Tang Yu. How could she not drag him to hell with her? She went straight to Shun Zhongshan's ward. There was no one else in the ward. Shun Zhongshan was sitting on the sofa, watching TV and eating a box of snacks. He spent most of his time eating without restraint. Shun Zhongshan was more than 20 kilograms heavier than before. He was no longer as elegant as he used to be. Instead, he had turned into a slightly slow-witted old man. Shun Lian walked over slowly and squatted in front of Shun Zhongshan. Shun Zhongshan was watching Happy Goat and Grey Taro with great interest. He was eating the snacks as he watched them. His eyes were as pure as a child's. "Dad." Shun Lian squatted in front of him and took the snacks from his hand. She fed him carefully. She fed him with small bites and was especially careful. "Is it delicious?" Shun Zhongshan could not speak. He repeated the two words, delicious. Delicious. Shun Lian's voice was still gentle. "Eat more if it's delicious." She fed him faster and faster. Shun Zhongshan was slowly losing his strength. His mouth could not stop moving. He wanted to say something, but he could not. Shun Lian continued to stuff snacks into his mouth. The gentle smile on her face was getting more and more scary. "Dad, eat more if you like it. It's rare for me to visit you. I have to feed you more, right? Dad, don't worry. Everything is fine in the company. Without you, Jin Taihe is still spinning, and even better than when you were there." She smiled lightly. "Dad, are you especially gratified?" Shun Zhongshan could no longer eat. The food was stuck in his throat, and his mouth was full. His face had turned purple, making people worry that he would die from suffocation in the next second. Shun Lian put down the things in her hands and smiled. "Dad, why are you so careless?" She picked up the water on the side and fed it to him. "Dad, drink water. If you die, no matter how high my achievements are, who can appreciate it?" "Is that so?" She poured the entire glass of water into his mouth, and Shun Zhongshan suddenly spat out the food and water. His face turned purple, and he couldn't stop panting. He pointed his finger at her, unable to utter a single word. Shun Lian was sprayed all over her face. She frowned and reached out to wipe the stains off her face. She chuckled and said, "Dad, do you hate me? Or do you want more?" She desperately poured the food in her hand into his mouth, regardless of whether Shun Zhongshan would die from gluttony. When his mouth was full of food, Shun Lian kicked him with her crippled foot. Shun Zhongshan's slightly heavy body fell to the ground, in a sorry state. And Shun Lian's foot was also hurting. Chapter 857. Shun Lian looked condescendingly at her father, who was lying on the ground, trying to live without purpose. She was still angry. "Shun Zhongshan, if it wasn't for you, there wouldn't be Pei Chichi in this world. I wouldn't be in such a miserable state, and I wouldn't have lost this leg. So, no matter how bad I am to you, you have to bear it. Because this is your sin, your sin." Shun Lian pursed her lips, narrowed her eyes, and smiled lightly. Only in this kind of perverted torture of Shun Zhongshan could she feel a trace of pleasure. Only then could she feel that she was really alive and had obtained everything. Yes, what was she afraid of? She had most of Jin Taihe's shares, and Sheng Yuan's 20%, and Pei Chichi, that poor little girl, had nothing. If she wanted to play her to death, it would be as easy as pinching an ant to death. Shun Lian stood up, ignoring Shun Zhongshan's appearance, and walked out calmly. For more than a year, as long as she was unhappy, she would come over to torture Shun Zhongshan. In the past, she was still worried about Mrs. Shun, but Mrs. Shun did nothing other than scolding her as a beast. So, Shun Lian could do whatever she wanted, as long as she didn't kill him. But she didn't know that after she left, two men in suits flashed into the ward and helped Shun Zhongshan up. They looked a little apologetic. "Mr. Shun, I'm sorry." Shun Zhongshan sat down again, and his expression was no longer stupid, but clear. His eyes were shining, and he looked at his former capable subordinates and waved his hand. "I don't blame you. I was the one who told you not to face her." He paused. "Did you get what I wanted?" One of them nodded. Shun Lian has no heart for work now. Jin Taihe's business has always been high, but she can't see it. She has been immersed in her relationship with Tang Yu, especially. The man said hesitantly, especially when Miss Pei returned to B City, it seems to have stimulated Shun Lian, and she has no heart for work. Shen Zhongshan nodded. This was within his expectations. However, his heart still ached. Shun Lian had been the apple of his eye since he was young. He had no feelings for Mrs. Shen, but because of Shun Lian, he had never thought of divorce. Even when Zhao Ku was pregnant, he didn't think twice about asking her to abort the child. He was sorry for his family, but he never thought that his daughter would become so crazy one day. When he slowly regained consciousness, his youngest daughter, Tang Xin, was gone. It was because Shun Lian told her the truth that Tang Xin chose to leave on her own accord. Compared to Shun Lian, he felt the most sorry for Tang Xin and Pei Chichi. Now that Tang Xin was gone, he could only make it up to Chichi. He was willing to give her everything he had. As for Shun Lian, as a father, he didn't want to see her suffer any more misfortune. No matter how bad she was still his child. Shen Zhongshan took the thing from the man's hand and looked at it carefully. This was half of Shen Zhongshan's life. He didn't expect that it would be used to deal with his own daughter. The reason why he did this was to protect her. As for Shun Lian, could she understand his painstaking efforts? After a while, Shen Zhongshan closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his tone was indifferent. "Make an appointment with Tang Yu for me." His subordinate nodded. "Okay." Shen Zhongshan turned his face away from the window. It was late autumn again. The leaves had all fallen. Some old friends had also left for a long time. 3 days later, Shen Zhongshan and Tang Yu met secretly. This meeting would completely change the situation in B City. Chapter 858. In the CEO's office of King Entertainment, Qin Anlan put down the newspaper in his hand and took a long drag on his cigarette. He held back the curses that were about to come out of his mouth. What a fucking pervert. Did Tang Sai not care about his reputation? Or was he anxious? He looked anxious. He heard that Lin Jinrong's proposal that night was disrupted by Tang Yu. It made sense. If his cousin married an ex-wife, how could Tang Yu stand it? However, Qin Anlan was not so naive to think that Tang Yu was only doing it for a confession. He was obviously supporting Marvel. Sometimes, rumors were the best publicity. He looked at Tang Yu's actions. He seemed to be leaning towards the Lin Group. Behind all this, it was not that simple. It was more or less related to Shun Lian. Perhaps, it was also the key reason why Tang Yu was controlled by Shun Lian. As he was thinking, there was a knock on the door. Qin Anlan looked up. "Come in." His assistant brought Pei Huan in. After they arrived, the assistant left first. Qin Anlan glanced at Pei Huan and said calmly, "Sit." Pei Huan looked down on Qin Anlan. She had done it with him once and was praised a little. Later, she did it herself. In the past 2 years, she had relied on her own resources to get back on her feet. It had nothing to do with Qin Anlan. Right now, Big Sis didn't lack money, so she didn't care much about Chairman Qin and was cold and indifferent to him. Pei Huan sat down and stretched her fingers. She admired her exquisite nails and blew at them. "Why is President Qin looking for me?" Qin Anlan frowned. He did not argue with her. "I heard that you have made up with Pei Chichi." In the past, Pei Huan and Pei Chichi did not interact with each other. Now, she did not know that they had made up. Pei Huan's eyes widened. After a while, he returned to his lazy look. "Where did President Qin hear this from?" "Pei Chichi and I. How is that possible?" Qin Anlan looked at Pei Huan and smiled. "So stubborn." Pei Huan still wanted to say something, but Qin Anlan unexpectedly said, "If there's nothing else, let's go out first." As he spoke, he lowered his head to look at the document. Pei Huan stared at him for a long time. Qin Anlan looked up. "Aren't you going out yet?" Pei Huan felt that Qin Anlan seemed to have changed. He seemed to have become more respectful towards women. In the past, in his company, women were equivalent to toys and merchandise. Was his change because of Pei Chichi? And his courteous attitude towards her was also because of Pei Chichi. Pei Huan hesitated for a moment before saying, "The day after tomorrow, I will be holding a religious ceremony at Qingshui Road. Pei Chichi will be there too." Qin Anlan lit up a cigarette. Why did you think of helping me? I thought you would hate me. After all, he had slept with Pei Huan in such a despicable way. However, Qin Anlan had long forgotten the process. But Pei Huan probably would not forget. Pei Huan snorted. I'll just take it that I was bitten by a dog. She paused for a moment. Her eyes were a little misty. Maybe I think it's better for you to be with Pei Chichi. She flipped her hair. Just take it that I don't want her to be with Lin Jinrong. With that, Pei Huan walked out, and Qin Anlan chuckled. Actually, Pei Huan cared about Pei Chichi in her heart, but she pretended to be indifferent on the surface. Chapter 859. Xiao Mai had been in charge of a few popular artists and was used to seeing big waves. She looked at Pei Huan's current state. It was not impossible for her to become more popular, but this girl had no ambition. She seemed to be playing around and did not care about being popular. That was good too. If you wanted to be popular in the entertainment industry, you had to pay the price. Actually, on the surface, many people were suffering from depression and were struggling to hold on. Pei Huan's current state was good too. Xiao Mai had been with her for a long time and could guess her thoughts. She had also heard of President Qin's thoughts. President Qin liked Pei Chichi. So be it. Xiao Mai smiled. As long as you're happy. Pei Huan stretched her arms. Yes, as long as you're happy. She did not lack anything now, but she felt that Pei Chichi was more miserable. She had once loved Jinrong deeply, and when Jinrong became a vegetable, she did not hesitate to abort the child. Pei Huan thought that the one she loved the most was herself, but Pei Chichi was different. She had been loved by Tang Yu, but when she was about to die, her child was gone, her husband became someone else's fiancé, and her company was gone too. Pei Huan felt that she was too kind to sympathize with Pei Chichi. On Saturday, Pei Chichi got up early to tidy up and called Old Khan for breakfast. Old Khan was not fully awake yet, but he could eat breakfast with his eyes closed. After eating, he touched his stomach in satisfaction. Where are you going later? You're up so early. Seeing that he was not fully awake, Pei Chichi wanted to tease him. She leaned over and said softly, I'm going to meet Pei Huan later. Can you send me there? Old Khan woke up immediately and glared at her. Then, he threw his wallet to her from his pocket. Take a taxi, or buy a car. She did not have the intention at first, but after hearing what Old Khan said, she felt that it was time to buy a car. How about an Audi Q3? It's suitable for girls. White is fine. Old Khan was a standard man of action. He simply called a familiar car dealer and ordered one. He transferred over 300,000 online without blinking. Pei Chichi cupped her face and walked up to Larokan. What should I do? I feel like I'm being kept by someone. But, this feeling is great. Larokan pinched her face and continued, that's good. We'll move to a new place to stay after we wash up tonight. Pei Chichi screamed, and Old Khan smiled contentedly. After waiting for about an hour, the car arrived. Miraculously, the license plates were all ready. Pei Chichi felt that Larokan couldn't be any better. Larokan glanced at her and said, I don't need to meet Pei Huan. Oh, not for now. She looked at his wallet like a puppy looking at a bone. Larokan knocked her on the head with his wallet and scolded jokingly, Pei Chichi, can't you grow up a little? You've seen a lot of money, but now you're acting like a miser. Pei Chichi laughed. Aren't we in dire straits now? Old Khan felt that money was really a good thing. A car was enough to bribe Pei Chichi. Otherwise, he would have to tell him about Pei Huan. Thinking of this, he looked at his little disciple suspiciously. Pei Chichi, you've been wanting a car for a long time, haven't you? Pei Chichi got into the car and tried it out. Then, she gestured for Larokan to get in and fasten his seatbelt. She smiled and said, how can I let Master spend so much money? I'll be more casual when Master is more casual. Chapter 860. After driving one round, Pei Chichi left Old Khan behind and drove back to Qingshui Road. She thought to herself that she wasn't too down and out. Now that she was driving an Audi, she could be considered to have returned home in glory. Pei Huan was already prepared. The chanting monk had arrived as well. Everyone was just waiting for Pei Chichi. The ritual was naturally long, but Pei Chichi didn't feel bored at all. She knelt and prayed for Pei Ming. Pei Huan knelt beside her and said softly, "Pei Chichi, I know that my mom and I didn't treat you well in the past. I snatched Jinrong away and my mom even wanted to sell you to Mr. Zhong. Later on, Zhao Ku ordered her to do all those things." Pei Chichi didn't say anything and listened quietly. She already knew what Pei Huan would say to her. The fact that she could walk back to the house in Qingshui Road meant that she was forgiven. The pain and the past haunted her like a demon. But after losing her child, the pain was too distant. Pei Huan's voice was still soft. "My mom was punished too. And I even seduced Tang Yu before, but I didn't succeed. Now, you can see it for yourself. It's just nice on the surface." Pei Huan stood up and so did Pei Chichi. Looking around, this was the place where they grew up together. They didn't have any good memories together. All they had was Pei Huan's knees and Pei Chichi being scolded by Ju Mailin. They were never good sisters. Later on, they became sworn enemies and couldn't wait to kill each other until Tang Yu saved Pei Huan. At that time, Pei Huan felt that there was actually someone in this world who cared about her. And that person turned out to be the most unlikely person, Pei Chichi. Pei Huan looked at Pei Chichi with a fervent gaze. "Pei Chichi, I'm tired. I don't want to fight anymore. I'm not as strong as you. You can digest everything and carry everything on your own. I can't." Her eyes were filled with desire. She yearned for Pei Chichi to hug her. She was a good-for-nothing. She accepted it. She just shrugged her shoulders. She longed for love, but no man was willing to give it to her. Those who came and went were all men who coveted her body or her money. Pei Huan was young and beautiful. She would not be as foolish as Ju Mailin, who would cheat her of everything just because of Rong Lei. She looked straight at Pei Chichi and pursed her beautiful lips. Pei Chichi didn't speak for a long time, so Pei Huan said, "It's fine if you don't want to. Pei Chichi, I don't have to be your sister. I'm telling you, I won't beg you again." Pei Chichi looked at her and said slowly, "Pei Huan, I remember that you are clearly a few days older than me." She was still shameless enough to want to be a younger sister. Pei Huan was stunned for a moment, then she became wild with joy. "It's not bad to be an elder sister, but Pei Chichi, you have to give in to me, because my IQ is lower than yours." Pei Chichi's face darkened. How did Ju Mailin give birth to such a shameless girl? She snorted coldly. "Didn't you say that you wouldn't beg me just now? You told me not to do this." Pei Huan wanted to put on airs, but she shrugged and said softly, "I'm not begging, I'm begging." There was a huge difference. Seeing that the ritual was over, Pei Chichi picked up her car keys and was about to leave. Pei Huan stopped her and said weakly, "I'm the one begging. I'm the one begging." Pei Chichi smiled. "You're quite obedient." Pei Huan followed behind her like a follower. This was a new understanding of Pei Chichi. Chapter 861. Pei Huan saw that the car was not bad and insisted on driving it. Pei Chichi sat by the side and made a phone call. It was Old Khan. They were discussing the car's situation over the phone. After the call, Pei Chichi put away her phone. Pei Huan looked at the road and asked casually, "Who's on the other end?" Pei Chichi did not know if it was an illusion, but she felt that Pei Huan cared about Old Khan very much. She did not really care about age. Old Khan was a good person, but Su Mo was in the middle. If Pei Huan insisted on being with Old Khan, would she repeat Shen Lian's tragedy? She thought about it and smiled. "It's Old Khan. The car is his." Right after she said that, there was a violent tremor in front of them. Pei Huan drove the car onto the green belt and white smoke rose from the front of the car. Pei Chichi felt dizzy and immediately unbuckled her seatbelt and got out of the car. She opened the hood of the car and white smoke came out. She choked a few times and sighed. Then, she contacted the car company to pull the car. Pei Huan was like a child who had done something wrong. She held her bag and stood at the intersection. "Pei Chichi, are you angry?" No. Pei Chichi stood up straight without much expression on her face. I'm just surprised that there's such a stupid person in this world. Pei Huan was more like a little wife, standing there without making a sound. Pei Chichi was a little confused. Pei Huan seemed to care about her a lot, but she never intended to give her heart. Never. She felt that she was a little despicable. Maybe it was because Pei Huan looked like Tang Xin. Tang Xin would always call Chichi in that soft voice, Tang Xin. But Tang Xin would never come back. No matter how soft Pei Huan was, she was not Tang Xin. Pei Chichi looked up with tears in her eyes. She did not dare to look at Tang Xin. Perhaps, she did not want to believe that Tang Xin was no longer around. If she didn't look, she would imagine that one day, Tang Xin would suddenly appear in front of her apartment door with a little bag on her back. She would look at her eagerly and say, Chichi, Dad and Mom are quarreling again. Can I stay with you for a few days? Tang Xin, if I could turn back time, I would choose to return all the good things to you, even if I had to lose everything. Pei Huan looked at Pei Chichi carefully. She saw a glint of tears in her eyes. Was she going to cry? Pei Huan comforted her clumsily. Pei Chichi, you still have me in the future. Pei Chichi turned her head, and the look in her eyes made Pei Huan a little afraid. Ever since she was young, she had been afraid and hated Pei Chichi's eyes. Now, she didn't hate it, but she was still afraid. She made no sound. All right. Then you wait here for the car. I have something to do, so I'll leave first. Pei Chichi wanted to be quiet, but with Pei Huan around, she couldn't be quiet. She wanted to see Tang Xin. Let's see if she's all right. Pei Huan nodded and agreed. Pei Chichi left. After a few steps, she turned back and saw that Pei Huan was still standing there. She looked like she was about to cry, like an abandoned child. Pei Chichi stood still and said quietly, Pei Huan, you're 22 years old now. You have to walk the road alone from now on. As for me, I can't always be by your side. If my heart is empty, how can I always be by your side? Pei Huan took a deep breath and resisted the urge to cry. Actually, she knew that Chichi had not forgiven her. But she was willing to wait. Pei Chichi bought a bouquet of daisies and went to visit Tang Xin. She stayed in the cemetery for a long time. Chapter 862. Tang Xin's smile was also very bright. The scorching sun was like a blazing fire, illuminating everything in front of her. As time went by, the sun dimmed and the sky turned grey, just like her mood. Pei Chichi stood there, the wind blowing on her face. She said in a low voice, Tang Xin, every time I go home and walk down the stairs, I feel very excited. I always feel that you might be waiting for me at the door. That was why she didn't want to come over and face the reality. But no matter how unwilling she was, Tang Xin was no longer there. She closed her eyes, not daring to imagine what Tang Xin was like before she left. It was just like how she didn't dare to imagine when she lost her child. Did her child feel pain? Did he miss this world? Did he feel indignant? She stood there blankly, looking at Tang Xin's photo. The bright color was turning gray bit by bit. She stood there until 2 in the afternoon. After a few steps, she saw a black limousine parked at the entrance of the cemetery. A slender figure was leaning against the car door, holding a cigarette in his hand. He was patiently waiting for her and accompanying her. When Pei Chichi turned around, she saw Qin Anlan. She paused for a moment, but still walked towards him. There was no way to hide, this was the only way. There was a bus 20 minutes walk from here. Pei Chichi thought of the new car. She wondered if Laro Khan would kill her when she got back. She walked to Qin Anlan's side, but she didn't say anything and just walked forward. It's going to rain soon. Are you going to go back in the rain? A man's voice came from behind. Pei Chichi ignored him and walked forward. Qin Anlan finished his cigarette, got into the car and drove beside her. The car window was open, and he smiled at her. Pei Chichi, you really don't want to get in the car? I won't like you. She didn't look at him and walked straight ahead. Qin Anlan laughed and continued to drive behind her. With one hand on the steering wheel and the other on the window, he looked at her with an amused smile. Pei Chichi was dressed in black today and had her hair tied into a simple ponytail. She looked extremely elegant. He just looked at her like this and felt that he was not tired of looking at her. This was very rare. No matter how beautiful a woman was, Qin Anlan would lose interest after looking at her twice. However, he had a different feeling for Pei Chichi. Looking at her profile, his gaze slowly softened. Pei Chichi, it's enough that I like you. You pervert. Pei Chichi stopped, and his car stopped as well. One was in the car, and the other was out of the car, staring straight at each other. Qin Anlan's voice was calm. Pei Chichi, I know it's stupid to confess my love in this situation, and I'll be suspected of taking advantage of the situation. But if I don't confess now, I'll be even more stupid. You will regret it later. She did not want to hear it. He covered his ears and continued walking. Qin Anlan's car continued to follow, driving slowly. His voice also drilled into her ears in a low and heavy voice. Pei Chichi, I like you. It's not the kind of like that I like women, but the kind of feelings I have for women. I can guarantee that I won't look for another woman in the future. In fact, I haven't looked for another woman since you returned to B City. Pei Chichi paused again and glared at him. Qin Anlan, no one asked you to keep your chastity. Qin Anlan's expression was a little innocent. He smiled slightly. Pei Chichi, but I want to do it. Not for you, but for myself. Because the girl I like will mind. Chapter 863. Let's try. His eyes were familiar to her. Pei Chichi, I'll kiss you for a minute. If you're not moved, I'll give up. Pei Chichi looked at him for 10 seconds and said, You're crazy. He didn't get angry. He chuckled and said, Chichi, you're lovesick. He drove with one hand and touched his face. Look, I've lost weight. Pei Chichi didn't look at him. She decided to ignore him. After a long time, he would feel bored. She felt that it would be more fun for him to go back to a group of women. Qin Anlan kept driving behind her. Pei Chichi walked faster and faster, and he couldn't help laughing. She was so cute even when she ignored him. It was raining. Qin Anlan coughed. It's raining. Are you sure you don't want to get in the car? I'm not going. Pei Chichi didn't even look back as he walked even faster. But she was walking too fast, and there was a small stone in front of her. She accidentally twisted her foot. Pei Chichi let out a soft cry. She frowned and looked in pain. Qin Anlan immediately turned off the engine and got out of the car to help her. What's wrong? Her foot hurt so much that she couldn't stand. She could only stand on one foot, but that was it. She stubbornly waved his hand away. It's none of your business. Qin Anlan looked at her beautiful face, which was wrinkled like a small bun. It was strangely cute. He thought about it. She didn't look so serious. I'll carry you. He gestured for her to lie on his back. Pei Chichi looked around. It was deserted. She didn't want to be drenched to death here, so she finally chose to lie on his back. When her body touched his back, he only felt that it was extremely soft. It was like a newborn bird, like a warm cloud brushing his heart. Her face was not too close to his neck, and her breath was faintly discernible. But this magnified his perception even more. He put his hand on her calf, which was quite gentlemanly. Qin Anlan walked to the car, held her with one hand, took out the car key with the other, put his wallet in his pocket, and then locked the door. Qin Anlan, what are you doing? Pei Chichi was stunned by his series of actions. She kicked her legs around and accidentally kicked the injured leg, causing her to cry out in pain. Qin Anlan carried her and patted her leg. I'll carry you to the hospital. She was anxious. Don't you have a car? Didn't you say you didn't want to get on the carriage? Qin Anlan chuckled. He had never felt so gentle in his heart before. All for Pei Chichi. Pei Chichi was so anxious that she used her uninjured leg to kick him, but to Qin Anlan, it didn't hurt at all. Pei Chichi bit her lip and gave in. Qin Anlan, it's raining now. He patted her again. Don't move, or I'll probably have to hold your butt. He thought for a moment and opened the trunk. He took out an umbrella and stuffed it in her hand. Hold it. Pei Chichi almost exploded. It was a half-hour drive from here to the city. How long would it take for him to carry her like this? Qin Anlan, put me down. She kicked and hit him. You pervert. His breathing stopped for a moment and his body froze. Pei Chichi didn't know what would happen to him. She held her breath. Chapter 864. He reminded her kindly, also, no one will come to help you even if you scream yourself hoarse. Pei Chichi stood on one foot and suddenly took out her phone from her pocket. I have this. She was about to call Laro Khan's phone when Qin Anlan snatched the phone from her hand. I don't have it anymore. He said abominably, now you can try your vocal cords and practice your voice. She glared at him. An evil smile appeared on his lips. Pei Chichi, all the best. After that, he really walked towards his car. Pei Chichi was furious. Was he really going to leave? Was he going to leave her alone? Qin Anlan. She called his name, extremely exasperated. He opened the car door and looked back at her. Pei Chichi pursed her lips and said in a softer voice, give me back my phone. She stood on one foot with the umbrella in one hand and looked like she was about to fall. Qin Anlan thought for a moment, turned off the phone, took out the card, and walked over to return the phone to her kindly. Here you go. As for the card, he had thrown it away. If she could move her mouth now, she would have bitten him to death first. Qin Anlan looked at her fierce eyes, smiled, and waved his hand. Goodbye, Pei Chichi. He walked back to the car, opened the door, got in, and started the car smoothly. She watched helplessly as he drove the car away. She stared blankly. Qin Anlan, you bastard. Finally, Pei Chichi lost her temper. She kicked her injured foot and fell again. This time, she was covered in mud and the umbrella fell to the side. She looked very embarrassed. She sat there angrily, hugging her knees and pursing her lips tightly. The rain fell on her face. It was cold, but not cold. Instead, it was a little cool, which was just right to put out the fire. The car stopped in front of her and Qin Anlan put his elbow on the window. Pei Chichi, do you want to sit in the mud or do you want me to carry you to the hospital? One couldn't eat one's pride. Pei Chichi only hesitated for 2 seconds before she pursed her lips. Let's go to the hospital. Qin Anlan's heart was softened like never before. The door opened, he got out of the car and closed the door. Step by step, he walked towards her. With every step he took, he felt as if he was doomed eternally. It wasn't that he didn't have a chance to escape, but he didn't want to. He was almost 30 years old, and this was the first time he liked a girl so much. For the first time, he didn't want to give up. He squatted down and helped her up, letting her lie on his back again. He picked up the umbrella and placed it in her hands. His shoulders were very broad, and the muscles on his back were very strong. It was probably because he had been training for a long time. Pei Chichi put one hand on his shoulder and held the umbrella with the other. His feet weren't very painful, but he couldn't walk. Just like that, he carried her on his back and continued walking. Even when cars passed by them, he had no intention of stopping them. Qin Anlan, are you crazy? It's going to be dark by the time we reach the hospital. Pei Chichi was tired and hungry. She wanted to bite him. Qin Anlan chuckled. Pei Chichi, if it's possible, I want to walk until there's no more Tangyu in your heart, and I'm the only one left. You're crazy. Pei Chichi was so angry that she really bit him on his shoulder. She bit him like a little puppy, lying on his back for a long time without moving. She bit him so hard that the muscles on Qin Anlan's back tightened. Chapter 865. She relaxed and pursed her lips without saying a word. Later, she simply ignored him. If he wanted to carry her, let him. Anyway, she couldn't live without a piece of flesh, however. Tangyu would have one less piece of flesh to worry about. Qin Anlan carried Pei Chichi on his back for the whole afternoon. The paparazzi in City B were not to be trifled with. They took photos early and prepared to see him on Monday. Moreover, Qin Anlan went to Xingyuan Hospital out of all the hospitals. Pei Chichi knew his intention, but she remained silent. He always carried her behind his back when he went for the registration, payment, diagnosis, and X-ray. The doctors and nurses who didn't know him would think that they were a couple. Those who knew him would look at him meaningfully. If Mr. Tang saw it, how painful it would be. After the examination, Pei Chichi only had a sprain. Although it was not a serious problem, she was still prescribed a lot of medicine. Pei Chichi looked bitter. It's better to stay in the hospital for a few days, the attending doctor suggested. He knew Pei Chichi, Mr. Tang's ex-wife. He was very smart. If she didn't stay in the hospital, she would have to go back. And she would be taken away by President Qin. Pei Chichi looked at the hospitalization form written by the doctor. Her eyes were a little dazed. I don't need to stay in the hospital, right? The doctor didn't look up. You will have difficulty moving for a week. It's better not to walk. If there is someone at home to take care of you, then you don't need to. If not, it's better to stay in the hospital. There won't be any accidents. Pei Chichi thought of Larokan. Larokan was outside all day and might not have time to take care of her. She thought about it and gave up. Stay in the hospital. Pei Chichi glanced at it and then coughed. I want to stay in the VIP ward, the best one. The doctor looked up and Qin Anlan smiled. Pei Chichi, do you have money with you? Of course you do. You made me fall. Shouldn't you be responsible? Pei Chichi said matter-of-factly. The smile on Qin Anlan's face deepened. Yes, I should indeed take responsibility. He paused. Don't worry, Pei Chichi. I'll take care of it. She looked up at him, feeling that his words were a little strange. Pei Chichi couldn't walk on her feet. In the end, Qin Anlan found a wheelchair and pushed her to the VIP ward on the top floor. Each ward here was a zone. Of course, the price was not cheap. It was about 100,000 yuan a week. Pei Chichi did not care about money. Anyway, Qin Anlan was rich. Qin Anlan settled her down, and the two nurses took good care of her. It seemed like there was no need for him to stay. Just then, Pei Chichi's stomach growled a few times. Qin Anlan's eyes became a little deep. I'll have someone send food over. She had just said no, but he had already called the servants at home to send the dishes over. Moreover, they were all dishes that were high in calcium and nourishing. Looking at her expression, Qin Anlan put away his phone and said gently, Pei Chichi, don't feel burdened. Didn't you say that you fell because of me? I should be responsible, right? He paused. Rest well. I'll have someone send 3 meals a day. If you need to go to the bathroom, ask the nurses to help you. Pei Chichi did not say anything. Suddenly, there was something in his hand. She looked at it and saw that it was her SAM card. She was a little surprised. Didn't he throw it away? I lied to you. Qin Anlan's eyes fell on her little face. After a long time, he smiled gently and did not say anything. He helped her put the card directly. Call me if you need anything. Chapter 866. Qin Anlan gestured with his hand. Before he left, he gave the nurse another order before leaving. Pei Chichi was a little surprised that he left so quickly. She had been forced to carry him to the hospital for 3 or 4 hours, but he didn't shamelessly stay. Qin Anlan looked at her blank expression and felt warmth in his heart. Pei Chichi, did you know that no matter how cold you look, you are actually a very soft and contradictory little thing? He didn't quite understand what attracted him to her before, but at this moment, he knew. It was this kind of awkward little temper that was very cute. He walked over and reached out to rub her hair, but for some reason, he gave up and said, I'll come to see you in a few days. Pei Chichi wanted to say no, but Qin Anlan had already left. She stared blankly for a long time before she picked up her phone and dialed old Khan's number. The sounds coming from the other side of the phone were a little chaotic, mixed with a man's panting and a woman's impatient voice. Pei Chichi rolled her eyes. Old Khan was doing private work again. Old Khan always said that she was looking for inspiration for art. Pei Chichi directly said that he was a carnivore. Moreover, Old Khan had a bad habit of looking for brainless women, saying that they were less troublesome. She waited for a long time before Old Khan got rid of the woman on him and sat up. Pei Chichi. Old Khan, let me tell you a piece of bad news and a piece of good news. Her voice was nasal. Old Khan leaned against the headboard and watched the little vixen crawl over again. Her little hand reached over again. He didn't care about her and snorted. Tell me the bad news first. Pei Chichi snorted. The bad news is that Pei Huan damaged your car. She skillfully lifted Pei Huan out. Sure enough, Old Khan's breathing was messed up, and then he said in a rough voice, "It's fine if it's damaged. I'll buy you another one tomorrow." Pei Chichi covered her face. Old Khan was quite rich. When Old Khan heard Pei Huan's name, he felt a little uncomfortable. He asked again, "What's the good news?" "The good news is, I'm in the hospital." Pei Chichi's voice was nasal again, like a little lamb. Now, only in front of Laro Khan would she reveal such a vulnerable side. Old Khan cursed in a low voice, and then his voice sounded a little exasperated. "Bullshit good news. Pei Chichi, where are you? I'll come over immediately." Therefore, Pei Chichi told him in a soft voice that it was just a minor injury. She only needed him to go back and bring her some clean clothes. Old Khan hung up the phone and shook off the little fairy on his body. That little vixen had been pestering Laro Khan for a long time. Seeing that Laro Khan was willing to eat meat with her, she made a phone call and wanted to leave. The little demoness was naturally unwilling. She pestered Old Khan and refused to let him go. Her voice was also extremely charming. "I don't care. Today, you're mine." Her little hand drew circles on his Xiong's fur. "You want to leave after just one time? Old Khan, tell me, are you satisfied?" As she said that, the little vixen sat in Old Khan's arms. Her voluptuous body made people want to vomit blood just by looking at it. She even kept swaying in front of Old Khan. Old Khan's eyes were bloodshot. However, he had seen this kind of scene many times, so he didn't have much interest in it. Chapter 867. Old Khan jumped out of bed, pulled up his pants, zipped up his pants, and left. That little vixen was cursing behind him, but Old Khan had already closed the door. Old Khan rode his heavy motorcycle back to the apartment first and swiped his card to open Pei Chichi's. She had his apartment card, and he had hers. They were master and disciple, but they lived like brother and sister. They had never said it out loud, but they had such feelings for each other. Old Khan's big hand was holding Pei Chichi's underwear, and it didn't look out of place at all. He stuffed it into a paper bag and rode his bike to the hospital. When he reached the top floor and saw the ward, Old Khan coughed softly. "This ward is more luxurious than my apartment." Pei Chichi was sitting with one leg hanging over the wall, and there was a bowl of tonic soup on the small table in front of her. She drank it contentedly and said in a muffled voice, "I faked an accident today." Old Khan put the paper bag on the head of the bed and sat down. He wanted to smoke, but put it down again. It must be a rich man. Pei Chichi didn't hide it from him. She said, "It's Qin Anlan." Old Khan was a photographer and could be considered a member of the entertainment industry. Towards Qin Anlan, the deepest impression he had was, Su Mo was also one of Qin Anlan's women. Of course, Su Mo was 10 years older than Qin Anlan, but Su Mo had still been cheated on by him. Qin Anlan naturally wouldn't trust an old woman like Su Mo. He slept with her a few times and gave her some resources. But in Old Khan's heart, this was a hurdle that he couldn't get over. His gaze was a little complicated. "That guy is pestering you." Pei Chichi put down the soup spoon in her hand. "It'll be fine after this period of time. Old Khan, I won't be with him." In the future, she wouldn't be with anyone for any reason. In the future, Pei Chichi wouldn't live for others, but for herself. If one day she wanted to fall in love and get married, it would definitely be for love. Old Khan let out a long breath and didn't say anything. Pei Chichi looked at his expression and guessed what was going on. She had heard about Su Mo and Qin Anlan from Amy. Of course, it wasn't directed at Laro Khan. Not many people knew about Laro Khan and Sumo. She didn't know how to comfort Laro Khan. She only told him because she didn't want to hide it from him. She cared about Laro Khan and his feelings. She didn't want to hurt Laro Khan's heart because of her. Old Khan was a smart man. Pei Chichi's reaction clearly showed that she knew something. However, they didn't point it out. Some things were better left unsaid. Laro Khan stayed with her until 10 o'clock in the evening. He only left when Pei Chichi was about to sleep. Fortunately, there were 2 nurses on duty, so he was not worried. He had work to do the next day, so he could only come in the afternoon. As soon as she arrived, she heard Pei Huan's soft voice, like a little lamb, persuading Pei Chichi to drink more. She said that the soup was made with love, which she had brewed for 3 hours. Old Khan's fan-sized palm was pressed against the door, and he had an indescribable expression on his face. Pei Huan was unhappy and snorted. "Why do you look like you've seen a ghost when you see me? Am I that scary?" Old Khan looked like he had eaten shit. He walked in slowly and placed a bag of fruits on the table. He looked at the soup in Pei Chichi's hand and took the spoon from Pei Chichi's hand. He took a sip and frowned. Chapter 868. Pei Huan's face changed. She took a sip of the soup in disbelief and immediately took the soup away from Pei Chichi's hand. "It tastes so bad. Why do you still want to drink it?" Pei Chichi laughed and looked at Pei Huan's clumsy appearance. "I just don't want your 3 hours of love to be wasted." Pei Huan bit her lip and didn't say anything. She quietly poured the soup away. After a while, she asked in a low voice, "Pei Chichi, do you think I'm useless and useless?" "Not really." Pei Chichi leaned against the headboard. "In fact, you're quite capable. For example." Before she finished, Pei Huan hurriedly interrupted her, "Say no more." She didn't want Laro Khan to know that she had stolen Lin Jinrong. Although she didn't appreciate this savage, she didn't want Laro Khan to know her past and know that she was such a bad woman. Pei Chichi looked at Pei Huan and said slowly, "I just said that you're good at acting." Pei Huan's heart was lifted up high, but now it fell down again. She looked at Pei Chichi and found a trace of mischief in her eyes. Pei Chichi looked at Laro Khan and Pei Huan, and then she laughed. It turned out that it was so fun to play tricks on others. Moreover, this person was Pei Huan, whom she used to hate the most. She hadn't laughed like this for a long time. Her whole face was glowing with a different expression. When Qin Anlan walked in, he saw such a scene. He stood at the door, leaning against the door, and looked at her deeply. Pei Chichi looked up and saw him standing at the door, and the smile on her face disappeared. Qin Anlan walked in and said indifferently, "What are you talking about?" The atmosphere changed as soon as he came. Pei Huan naturally didn't dare to act rashly in front of him, or rather, she didn't want to see this person. Because, she had slept with Qin Anlan and Laro Khan. Although it was all once, she still had some integrity. She felt a little awkward, so she found an excuse and left. Pei Chichi looked at Laro Khan. He didn't look too good. He must have taken it to heart. She sighed. Just like how she disapproved of Pei Huan and Old Khan from the bottom of her heart, she did not want Old Khan to be with Sumo either. People like Sumo were too involved in worldly affairs and were obsessed with fame and fortune, but Old Khan was different. Old Khan was loyal to his friends. He was not restricted by the secular world, and his love was too deep. Come to think of it, he and Sumo weren't young anymore. If Sumo had the slightest intention of getting married, she wouldn't have delayed it until now. She said in a low voice, "Old Khan, I have something to discuss with President Qin about compensation. You can go back first." Laro Khan clenched his fists and looked at Qin Anlan indifferently. The muscles on his face twitched a few times. Fortunately, it was hidden by his beard. Pei Chichi sighed inwardly as she watched Laro Khan leave. After Laro Khan left, Qin Anlan rubbed his nose. "He seems to be prejudiced against me." Since he said that, he must have known something. Pei Chichi did not play dumb. Instead, she sneered. "Then you have to ask yourself if you've done anything." Qin Anlan would never tell Pei Chichi about his relationship with Sumo. He smiled. I've never done anything with old Khan. Pei Chichi knew what was going on when he avoided the main point. Qin Anlan put down the lunchbox in his hand and sat down. Are you angry? His tone was actually a little intimate. Pei Chichi frowned. Qin Anlan, why should I be angry? He quickly changed the topic. Didn't you say you wanted to talk about compensation? Chapter 869. Pei Chichi opened the food box in his hand, and the soup inside was delicious. It was surprisingly to her liking. As she drank the soup, she said vaguely, "Give me your family's cook." Qin Anlan's eyes lit up. "If you marry me, my chef can make soup for you every day." Pei Chichi put down the spoon in her hand and said, "It sounds like a big price." Qin Anlan pursed his lips and chuckled. "Pei Chichi, you can try it now." She continued to sip the soup. When she was done, her eyes were still lowered, but her voice couldn't be more serious. "Don't trouble old Khan." Qin Anlan's gaze deepened. She had finally mentioned this. He had a lot of pasts, but he had never been stained by a single leaf. However, among the people he had slept with, one was Pei Huan, and the other was Su Mo, who had a little relationship with Pei Chichi. Pei Huan didn't have anything to do with it. As for Su Mo, Pei Chichi seemed to care about it, but she cared about it for old Khan. Qin Anlan said in a deep voice, "I don't have anything to do with Su Mo, and I won't do anything to old Khan because of it." His voice deepened. "Pei Chichi, maybe my past is more exciting than Tang Yu's, but I promise it won't happen again." Qin Anlan, "I really don't need your guarantee." Pei Chichi smiled. "But I'm very happy that you promised not to do anything to old Khan." Qin Anlan couldn't help but smile when he saw her smile. Then, he cleaned up the dishes for her. It was time for him to leave. However, he didn't leave. Instead, he sat on the sofa and dealt with some matters on his phone. After a while, his assistant also came over, bent over, and whispered something. Qin Anlan was rarely serious. His side profile was handsome and compelling. If one looked closely, he would feel that he was more handsome than usual. He was also so dazzling that people would take a few more glances at him. Pei Chichi was no longer interested in listening to some of the things that happened in the entertainment industry. Among them, there was no lack of international movie queens. It seemed that Qin Anlan was not very satisfied with that one. That was true. Sometimes, when the A-listers became arrogant, they would not be very obedient. After his assistant finished speaking, Qin Anlan first glanced at Pei Chichi and then said calmly, "Give her the cold shoulder for a while. Tell the public that she's going to the United States to study." The assistant nodded and left. Later, a few higher-ups came and sat on the sofa with Qin Anlan to discuss some matters, such as investing in new movies. After they left, Pei Chichi looked at him. "Is Empress Yi really going to be frozen by you?" Only the Chinese empress, who was like the sun in the sky, could shine in Canada. The foreign media called her the Chinese star. But when it came to Qin Anlan, she was frozen just like that. Qin Anlan's voice was a little lazy. "She's too capricious. King Entertainment doesn't need a capricious artist." "Aren't you afraid that she'll leave?" Pei Chichi quite liked Empress Yi. She sat up straight. "You have to know that with her current net worth, she can easily set up her own studio and receive a blockbuster." Chapter 870. Pei Chichi stared at him for a long time before spitting out 2 words. "Unscrupulous businessman." She then asked, "Then will Yi Tianhu be kept in cold storage?" "I'll release her when she's obedient." Qin Anlan's voice was indifferent, cold, and emotionless. Pei Chichi didn't say anything. She wasn't in a position to plead for others. Besides, Yi Tianhu's status was in the billions. She wouldn't have to worry about making ends meet even when she was old. After a while, she suddenly looked up at him. "Qin Anlan, did you sleep with her before?" President Qin almost choked. He hadn't expected Pei Chichi to ask such a question. He felt a little uncomfortable. He grunted in agreement. He coughed lightly and added, "Actually, that was a few years ago, and it was the only time." He had slept with Yi Liangqiu before. That was her first time. He had only slept with her once. At that time, when he looked at the cold and charming girl below him, he felt that she was a gem and that she would shine brightly in the future. He found her a top manager to guide her and helped her to the throne of the best actress. Of course, there was a period of time in between when Yi Liangqiu was in a rebellious phase. She disappeared for half a year, and when she returned to King Entertainment, she was as thin as a ghost. Qin Anlan lost his temper for a while and put her in cold storage. Actually, she wouldn't be able to make a comeback if he didn't put her in cold storage. Because she was so thin, she didn't look good on camera at all. A year later, Yi Liangqiu returned to the public's attention. She amazed the public with a single feat and became an A-list artist of King Entertainment. Later on, she shone on the international stage. Qin Anlan rarely saw her. They would only see each other occasionally at award ceremonies. Yi Liangqiu cherished her reputation. After all these years, there wasn't even a single scandal. This made him very satisfied. But this time, it seemed to have touched a nerve. The company had arranged for her to study in the United States for 2 years. In the future, they would arrange for her to star in top Hollywood blockbusters, but Yi Liangqiu was unwilling. This was an opportunity that many people dreamed of, but she rejected it without even thinking about it. This made Qin Anlan quite angry. At this time, when Pei Chichi asked if he slept, Qin Anlan remembered that he had slept with Yi Liangqiu once. To put it more crudely, he slept with an artist. When he said that, Pei Chichi replied, "That's quite a pity. I've always liked watching her movies." Qin Anlan's eyes were clear. "Pei Chichi, if you marry me, I'll let her shoot 1 movie a year." "Forget it." She ignored his crazy words. For a moment, the scene quieted down again. Qin Anlan smiled. "Why did you bring this up?" Pei Chichi looked at him. "Let's not talk about this. I don't think we have anything in common to talk about." He smiled bitterly and didn't say anything else. He also felt that it was about time to leave. Otherwise, Pei Chichi's eyes were as fierce as a little wolf dog's. It was quite scary. Qin Anlan went out and saw Old Khan at the elevator door. He was surprised but not surprised. He walked over slowly. "Waiting for me?" Old Khan didn't say anything. In his opinion, if he could solve it with his fists, he was definitely not blind. With a single punch, Qin Anlan received a panda eye, and his body crashed into the elevator wall with a bang. It was quite a frightening sight. Qin Anlan groaned in pain. His body leaned against the wall of the elevator for a long time before he calmed down. Chapter 871. Old Khan's face was tense and his voice was hoarse. "Yes, I'm going to beat you up." Qin Anlan didn't retort nor did he fight back. Of course, it was part of his ruse. He was willing to bet that if he fought with Old Khan, Pei Chichi would definitely help Old Khan. It would be difficult for him to see her in the future. Fortunately, Old Khan was rational and didn't hit him again. Otherwise, it would be too easy for him. Don't think that I don't know what he's thinking. He's still thinking about flirting with his little disciple. Qin Anlan stood up slowly and wiped his lips. "Old Khan, believe it or not, you don't know sumo as well as I do." Old Khan widened his eyes like copper bells. He couldn't wait to eat Qin Anlan up. "Sumo is worldly in your heart, but do you really know her?" Qin Anlan looked into Old Khan's eyes. "Do you know what she desires the most?" Old Khan didn't know what happened to Sumo, and Sumo would probably never tell him. Qin Anlan knew about it because of the news from the upper class. Just like how some men would talk about it with their closest friends after fooling around with a woman. He once heard that Sumo was fooled by a rich man until she couldn't bear a child. The process must have been unbearable, and it would be the pain of Sumo's life. She was most afraid that the people she cared about and loved would know about it. "Old Khan, let it go. Sumo is already suitable for you. She's not the Sumo of the past." Sumo would turn back if there was a way back. Sometimes, it was just like that. After seeing too much of this world's brilliance, this world's good, this world's bad, this world's helplessness. What they wanted to find was still the him from before. However, things were different. It wasn't that she didn't want to turn back, but she couldn't. He looked at old Khan's beast-like expression and knew what he was thinking. He smiled bitterly. But I'm serious about Pei Chichi. Do you believe me? Old Khan squinted his eyes and his bearded face was expressionless. If it wasn't for Pei Chichi, do you think I would have endured this for Pei Chichi? Qin Anlan's tone was calm, but it carried the authority of a superior. Old Khan smiled. That's right. President Qin, you're powerful, and everyone in the entertainment industry treats you like a god. But in the world of love, no one is superior. Do you think others should accept your charity? After that, Old Khan left angrily. Qin Anlan just watched the elevator open and close, took out a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, and took a puff. Laro Khan was right, his kindness was really worthless in the eyes of Pei Chichi. He looked at himself in the mirror. It was still the same Qin Anlan, but in those eyes, he saw a hint of bitterness in love, and also saw his pitiful hope for love. Later on, Qin Anlan came almost every day, but he wouldn't stay for long, leaving after half an hour. Pei Chichi couldn't even catch up. However, no matter how he came and went, he was never able to cast a stone into the lake of her heart. She was still unmoved, and every time he came, she would lazily deal with it. Qin Anlan sensed that Pei Chichi wasn't as cold as before, but she had learned to be tactful like old Khan. This wasn't a good thing for him, because it was like boxing. Every punch he threw hit cotton and bounced back. Chapter 872. At the same time, Tang Yu was also restless. See You on Monday had always been influential, and the headline of this week's edition was Qin Anlan and Pei Chichi. In the high-definition photo, Pei Chichi was lying on Qin Anlan's back with one hand on Qin Anlan's shoulder and the other holding an umbrella. Qin Anlan had an indulgent smile on his face, while Pei Chichi was pouting, looking aggrieved. It was drizzling, and the man in black was carrying a beautiful girl on his back. It was a beautiful scene. At least, they were a good match. Tang Yu stood in front of the French window in the CEO's office, frowning as he looked out. That direction was Shengyuan Hospital. There was a newspaper on his desk. See You on Monday. When he saw the photo, he was shocked and disappointed. He had guessed that Qin Anlan would do anything to get close to her. He even felt a sense of fear. He was afraid that she would fall for Qin Anlan. Qin Anlan was serious. He knew how much he could move a girl's heart. When he was in school, there were countless girls who liked Qin Anlan. Xiao Ran stood behind him and reported calmly, but in fact, she was about to cry in her heart. The CEO had been standing there for an hour and did not move an inch. She tried to calm herself down. Miss Pei's foot is injured, and she is now staying in the VIP ward on the top floor of Shengyuan Hospital. She hesitated for a moment before continuing. President Qin goes there every day. Huff. The temperature in the office dropped by a few degrees. Tang Yu's back stiffened. How's the injury? I asked the attending doctor, and it's nothing serious. It's just a sprained tendon. She will be discharged in 2 days. Xiao Ran had always been meticulous, so she had already asked about everything. Tang Yu pursed his thin lips and said with a suppressed voice, "Contact her and tell her that I will be going to the US for 3 days at 7 o'clock tonight. That's the only time I have a chance to be interviewed by her." Xiao Ran stared blankly for a moment before instinctively saying, "What if Miss Pei is unwilling?" "She will agree." Tang Yu's voice was calm, like the calm before the storm. Shengyuan Hospital. She was there. Everything seemed to be destined. Xiao Ran quietly left, closing the door behind him. The room was quiet. Only Tang Yu stood there, trying hard to calm himself down. He was not sure if Chichi would still be so cold to Qin Anlan after seeing that person. Would she still love and hate only him, Tang Yu, or would she make a different choice? The phone on the table rang. Tang Yu paused for a moment and walked over. When he saw that it was Shun Lian calling, he did not intend to answer it. But the phone kept ringing. He just looked at it, his expression cold. Finally, the bell stopped ringing, but there was a message. He took a look and saw that it was from Shun Lian. There was only one sentence. Do you feel as if your heart is being cut by a knife after reading the headlines? Tang Yu deleted the message, and his expression became even colder. Shengyuan Hospital. Pei Chichi walked out of the attending doctor's office, preparing to go back to the ward to tidy up. She would be discharged the next day. She had just received a call from Xiao Ran. Tang Yu was going to the US for 3 days, and he wanted her to accompany him for an interview. She refused. Even if the chief editor would not let her go easily, she could just quit. No one knew what would happen in the end. When she reached the top floor and was about to exit the elevator, a man stood at the door and looked at her. Miss Pei, our Mr. Shen wants to see you. Chapter 873. Pei Chichi took a step back vigilantly, and her eyes were guarded. I don't know any Mr. Shen. The man smiled. Miss Pei, do you still remember Mr. Shen Zhongshan? Shen Zhongshan? Pei Chichi was stunned. Her feet were as heavy as lead, and it was difficult for her to walk. She didn't know how she walked over. She only knew that when she stood in front of Shen Zhongshan, the sun was dazzling, but when it shone on her, she still felt cold. Shen Zhongshan saw her in his ward. He was sitting in a wheelchair, and from his back, his figure was not as good as before. He looked like a fat middle-aged man. When the door closed, Shen Zhongshan turned his head slowly, and his eyes fell on Pei Chichi's face. His eyes were very complicated. At least, Pei Chichi couldn't see through him. After a long time, she said softly, Mr. Shen, what can I do for you? His eyes were very clear, and she didn't need to beat around the bush. Shen Zhongshan's eyes were fixed on her for a long time, and then he said softly, after you came back, did you go to your mother's grave to see her? When he mentioned Zhao Ku, Pei Chichi's lips tightened. Some truth was about to come out. And it wasn't what she wanted to see, and she didn't want it to be true. She even wanted to escape. She didn't speak, but just stared at the familiar yet strange man in front of her. At this moment, she was like a frightened little animal, and all the hair on her body was standing on end. Shen Zhongshan looked at the girl who was full of wariness, and he said slowly and deeply, Chichi, I am your father. As he said that, he gently handed a document to her. Pei Chichi had seen that kind of document once. At this time, it was again. She looked down, and her eyes were a little sore. Then she smiled faintly and put the document back in Shen Zhongshan's hand. Mr. Shen, I don't want to see it. I think you are all mistaken. My father is Pei Ming. As she said that, she was about to leave. Chichi, I made Zhao Ku pregnant. You and Tang Xin are both my children. Shen Zhongshan didn't hide anything. Pei Chichi stopped in her tracks. Her face was as white as snow. Tang Xin was also Shen Zhongshan's child. How could this be? Then she and Tang Xin would have the same father and mother. Shen Zhongshan slowly stood up with the help of the wheelchair and walked towards Pei Chichi. His voice was low as he said, There's a DNA test between you and me. I did it when you were pregnant, but my body refused to allow me to donate my bone marrow to Tang Xin. Bone marrow? Pei Chichi was in a daze. Shen Zhongshan's voice was calm. When you were 6 months pregnant, you were diagnosed with an acute blood disease. Pei Chichi's ears were buzzing as if she had been struck by lightning. She took a step back and pressed her body against the door. Shen Zhongshan knew that she couldn't accept it, but he still said cruelly, It was Shen Lian's bone marrow that saved you, but her condition is that Tang Yu divorce you. Was that why she thought Tang Jiyuan was her father? Pei Chichi closed her eyes and shook her head violently. She had already guessed that Tang Yu wasn't her father and Tang Jiyuan wasn't her brother. But she didn't expect this to be the result. Also, Shen Zhongshan's voice was heavy. Tang Yu unconditionally gave 20% of Sheng Yuan's wealth to Shen Lian, and he only has 31%. If he is with you, then this 20% could change the history of Sheng Yuan. Pei Chichi was stunned. Chapter 874. Shen Zhongshan looked at her quietly. Ask Tang Yu about this. He didn't want to say such cruel words to her. Shen Zhongshan didn't know that. He didn't want to tell her that the child was really gone. Pei Chichi's face was as pale as snow. Suddenly, she took the document from Shen Zhongshan's hand and ran out. Her feet were still hurting, but she didn't care. She wanted to see Tang Yu immediately. She wanted to ask him, was the child really gone? In her heart, there was a last trace of despair. She hoped that the world still had a trace of mercy for her, just as if it pitied her. When she was outside, she quickly stopped a taxi and said Sheng Yuan's name. The taxi driver sent her to the destination. She dropped the money and ran to the elevator. The receptionist didn't have time to stop her. Pei Chichi stood in the elevator and looked at herself in the elevator mirror. Her forehead was full of sweat and her face was red. It had been a long time since she looked like this. The elevator reached the top floor. When the door opened, Xiao Ran was standing in front of it. Obviously, Xiao Ran had received a call from the receptionist. Chichi, the president is not here, Xiao Ran said with some embarrassment. Pei Chichi pushed him away and walked towards Tang Yu's office. She stretched out her hand and hit the door hard. However, no one answered and the door couldn't be opened. Even so, she still hit the door hard. Xiao Ran saw that her hands were red and went forward to persuade her. The president is not here. Why don't you come another day? Does he have time to see me? Pei Chichi kicked hard and didn't stop. She didn't care if she hurt herself at all. Her voice was excited and desperate. Tang Yu, come out. She knew that he was inside. She knew that he didn't want to see her. She even knew that he wanted her to go to the United States with him for 3 days. What did he want to do? She kicked hard and made a scene shamelessly, but he still didn't open the door. Pei Chichi held the document in her hand and slowly fell on the door. Her face was full of tears. In the office, Tang Yu sat at the desk with a cigarette in his hand. It wasn't that he didn't hear her cry, it wasn't that he didn't know the desire in her heart. However, he still decided not to tell her about Xiaoxin's existence for the time being. For the sake of Xiaoxin's safety and to ignite the anger in Pei Chichi's heart. Because he knew that if she had Xiaoxin, she would think of Tang Xin's death. She would leave him. He needed time. He needed a fresh start with her. Originally, he wouldn't have let her know part of the truth so quickly. Everything stemmed from his agreement with Shen Zhongshan. Now, apart from Sheng Yuan, Shen Lian could no longer threaten him. Tang Yu finished the cigarette in his hand and pressed the intercom. Tell her when I'm going to the United States. The second secretary immediately went to Xiao Ran and whispered in his ear. Xiao Ran was also in a difficult position, so he could only pass the message to Pei Chichi. Pei Chichi looked at Xiao Ran in a daze. America. She pressed her body against the door and pursed her lips tightly. After a while, she kicked the door hard and left as quickly as she came. Pei Chichi went back to the apartment and packed her luggage like crazy. Seeing this, Laro Khan was envious. What happened? Pei Chichi closed the suitcase and looked up at Laro Khan. I'm going to the United States. The United States? Laro Khan couldn't help frowning. Why are you going to the United States? An interview. Pei Chichi said quickly and then walked towards the door with her luggage. Laro Khan saw that her expression was not right, so he went forward and grabbed her hand. Chichi, I can't let you go like this. Chapter 875. Old Khan, let me go alone. She looked at him. This matter is very important to me. I must go. Old Khan did not let go of her. He grabbed her arm with one hand and made a few calls with the other hand. Then, he felt like scolding someone. He looked at Pei Chichi. You'll be eaten up, do you know that? This was obviously a trap set by Tang Yu. He just wanted this little sheep to jump in and then be cleaned and eaten. Why didn't she understand? Pei Chichi's face was filled with madness. She smiled lightly. I don't care. Old Khan, please let me go. I'll go crazy if I don't go. But as she smiled, her tears started to flow. Old Khan could not bear to see her like this. He wiped away her tears with his rough hands and said in an unbelievably gentle voice, "It's not that I won't let you go, but at least let me take you." Pei Chichi's lips were trembling. "Old Khan, thank you." Laro Khan took the luggage from her hands, put one arm around her shoulder, and carried her downstairs. At this moment, Pei Chichi realized how weak her legs were. There were still tears on her face. She looked ugly in the elevator mirror. She sniffled and said in a nasal voice, "Old Khan, am I stupid?" Old Khan's palm warmly touched her little head and rubbed it. "It's good that you know." This girl had always been calm and composed. When had she ever behaved like this? He also knew that this was a serious matter. Otherwise, Pei Chichi would not be like this. When they reached the ground floor, Old Khan put her luggage in the trunk and went to get a visa from his connections before driving her to the airport. When they arrived at the airport, there was still an hour before Tang Yu's private plane took off and the sky was already dark. The airport was still brightly lit at night. The runway in the distance was filled with navigation lights that stretched as far as the eye could see. In the sky, there were planes taking off or returning. Only the strong night wind accompanied her. Another plane took off. The wind howled and the sound of the plane rushing into the clouds was heard as it slowly disappeared into the night sky. Pei Chichi stood there and suddenly turned around. Not far away, Tang Yu, dressed in black, stood there. Beside him were Xiao Ran and a few higher-ups. Laro Khan tilted his head and looked at Pei Chichi. "Girl, you really don't need me to accompany you?" She did not make a sound but stared at Tang Yu in a daze. It was the same for Tang Yu. Everything would change. However, in the middle, there was already a separation of life and death. Slowly, she walked towards him. Old Khan wanted to stop her, but he couldn't. Pei Chichi paused. "Master, I will be back." After that, she walked towards Tang Yu without hesitation. Old Khan narrowed his eyes. In the end, he just lit a cigarette and smoked in the night. When it came to relationships, no one else could interfere. Pei Chichi walked straight to Tang Yu, stood still, and raised her head. Her lips moved slightly, but in the end, she did not ask anything. "Let's go." He took her luggage and said calmly. Then he walked in front. Pei Chichi followed behind him and walked towards the tarmac. Old Khan smoked his cigarette and watched, feeling rather upset. Damn it, he couldn't help his disciple and watched her fall into the trap of the big bad wolf. Before boarding the plane, Pei Chichi suddenly turned around. Old Khan could never forget her expression at this moment. It was so determined and resolute. Pei Chichi stared at Old Khan and then boarded the plane. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.